Hi, this is Eric Martin with BoardGameGeek. I am joined by Pat Marino and Sean Fletcher, both from the Op. Welcome. Glad to have you guys here.
Oh, good to see you.
So you guys, man, look at those walls behind you. Nicely outfitted with games entirely from the Op. What a coincidence.
Mostly, yeah.
So we are here today looking at Talisman Star Wars. So Talisman, of course, has been around for decades, but combining the two, well, this is a brand new game. It's going to be released on the EMA markets. So Europe, Middle East, and Asia, I believe, or Africa.
Correct.
Okay. Maybe you can give us an overview of what we're doing in the game and how this differs from talismans that people might be familiar with.
So this
because
is our
you've also
classic,
done other. I was just going to mention you've done other talisman games as well with Kingdom Hearts, with the Batman version. So there's lots of variety in terms of what you've been doing.
Yeah, this is a classic roll and move adventure game in the vein of all of the other Talisman titles. And in this one, you're taking on the role of either a Jedi or a Sith master, and you are trying to fight your way to the center of the board where you can reach Exegol, where you'll face the Emperor, who will either bring you in as the ultimate Sith apprentice, or who you'll face and defeat to bring the light side of the Force to the galaxy forever.
Okay. That's very succinct, very straightforward. So how does it work? What are the complications as we're trying to do things and get to the center of the board?
Well, as you're traveling around the board, you're going to encounter the different planets that you stop on, each of which has their own flavorful effect on the game. You'll also find adversaries in the deck of encounter cards. Now, those adversaries are, this is where we start getting really cool with new developments in Talisman design. Those adversaries are coded to either the light side or the dark side of the Force. So depending on whether you are a Sith or a Jedi, some of those adversaries will actually become confidants or guides to you. And those that are of opposite alignment, you can fight before your opponents of the opposite alignment match up with those adversaries.
Okay. So you would fight with them because otherwise they would stay on the board for...
Correct.
The people
Correct.
On the opposing side?
So if I am a Sith and I uncover a Sith confidant or guide, if that's a guide, they're going to stay on the board and wait for other Sith to land on that space and give them an effect. If it's a Sith confidant, they'll travel with me. But if it's a light-aligned character, it's an adversary, and I'll have to fight them. If I can't beat them in combat, on my next turn I move along, and they stay there on the board waiting for a light-aligned character to move into that space and interact with them in their own way.
Okay. So what is the player count for the game, and how many characters are going at one time? Make it sound like there's a lot happening at once, possibly.
There are 12 characters to pick from, 6 light side and 6 dark side, and it's a 2 to 6 player game. So at any given time, you're going to have some left out of the game, but that just makes it so that the next time you play, you can pick up all new characters and experience it a whole new way.
Okay. Because characters have unique powers?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Every character is designed to reflect their personality and abilities from the various Star Wars stories. And we covered an entire gamut of Star Wars stories, from the prequels through the Star Wars Rebels stories, through the original 4, 5, and 6, and 7, 8, and 9.
Okay. I don't know if it's possible to show a couple on screen. And there we have
the busts of these characters are gorgeous, and the illustrations are fantastic as well. And if you look closely, you can see that each of the characters has their lightsaber there in the base of the bust as well.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so fans of the original Talismans will see some similarities in terms of, starting stats. We have strength and will in this game instead of craft, which was sort of your magical ability in the classic And then they have those unique powers listed there. So each time you play, you can choose a different character, have a slightly different experience, or a different strategy in terms of how you look at leveling up your character, what things you want to go after more than other characters, and how you kind of forge your path to the center of the board. Some characters might be really good at acquiring money and then buying items. Other characters are good at leveling up the will because they're strong Jedi and they have those abilities to utilize. And then Fletch hadn't talked yet about how we replace the spell cards in this game, and I think that's an interesting element of it too.
Oh yeah, that was really exciting. When you think about magic as applied to the Star Wars universe, it's kind of obvious we had to have force skills. So our force skill deck is actually divided up into 3 categories. There are light force skills, dark force skills, and neutral force skills. And depending on which side of the force you're aligned to, you may only be able to use 2 of those 3 categories of force skills. Now, drawing into a force skill card of opposite alignment isn't the worst thing you could ever do, because every character also has one special skill that's activated by discarding any force skill card. So if I'm Obi-Wan Kenobi and I draw Force Lightning, which is a Sith card, I can still discard that to use Obi-Wan's special unique force ability.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So what challenges were involved in trying to cover the entire range of Star Wars? Because it seems like, do you actually follow on a timeline as you're headed towards the center of the board from the earliest?
Not in this game. In this game,
episodes?
we've sort of taken a conceit and put all of the characters from all timelines into the world at the same time. So you can have Rey playing at the same time as Mace Windu, who, spoiler alert, in the stories actually is dead for 30 or 40 years before Rey is born.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, it's good that you get Star Wars Rebels in there. I know usually when people talk about the movie universe, I mean, there's so many Rebel fans out there that actually mixing them in there seems like a really good fit. So.
Yeah, and we've got some really cool Easter eggs for all kinds of Star Wars fans in here too. For example, I don't know how close we can look on the board there, which is gorgeously custom illustrated, but right around the 7 o'clock mark in the second row in, you'll see Batu right there. And this is the first time Batu has ever appeared in a board game. That would be Black Spire Outpost for any of the Disney Parks fans.
They're in December. So. It was magical.
All right. So maybe we can look at some of the adversary cards as well, just to get an idea of what you might possibly face. No?
Okay, so these are character cards, and these show the powers you might have as you're playing the game.
Okay.
And I think you're looking at the back side of that card. So instead of turning into a frog in the Star Wars universe, you become disoriented.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of those original mechanics, like, using the force skills instead of spell cards, or, there's always this negative effect in classic Talisman of if you roll badly, you can get turned into a frog and you have to hop around the board for a couple turns until you come back. So when we do these thematic versions, we have to find sort of these bridges across of how do we take those types of mechanics that the Talisman fan base really wants to be reflected in some way and keep them in there, but in a thematic way that makes sense. And it's sort of that disoriented mechanic is, things have gone awry. You're kind of lost for a little bit. Your plan has fallen apart. So it's going to cost you a few turns of limited movement and actions to catch back up and sort of get your plan in full motion again and have all your abilities, but without the oddness of like, oh, okay, now you've been turned into a frog and you're hopping around planets. Just wouldn't make sense. And of course, thematically, like Talisman is all set on a sort of Earth-like world where you're traveling around in classic fantasy. And there wasn't, as we sort of looked at this game, it's like, okay, can you set the whole Star Wars storyline on one planet, and would that make sense with all these characters on the same planet at the same time? And it just didn't really feel like inclusive of all that Star Wars has to offer. And so this board, as Fletch mentioned, we did this sort of planet hopping thing where we can have this great custom art that is close up and showing, scenes from each planet and each world and how it's set up, to give you that feeling that your character's there, rather than, as you're approaching the planet, if the whole board was just sort of different color spheres, it might not feel quite as immersive as like, oh yeah, I'm on the green circle now, as opposed to when you're really looking close up at what that location is like and what it feels like. And there were definitely some challenges there of like, okay, but where in the source material do we have a good image of what exactly that looks like, and how do we recreate it, and how do we have our artist illustrate that in a way that, when it goes to the Lucas team, they say, yes, we are on board that is canon of what that location should look like, and mapped all the way it should be, and the kind of like setting, environment, weather, all that stuff that you need to be accurate.
Right. So did they give you reference material ahead of time, or this was up to you to present it and say, this is our idea of what we're going to do, and then they'll give feedback on that?
For some of it, there was readily available source material, and it was a matter of our illustrator kind of piecing things together to make something really, really unique. And in other cases, we didn't have much to go with, so we had to get creative and imaginative. And in the end, with Lucasfilm's blessing, everything came out great. And the board, I think, is one of the most amazing game boards I've ever seen. I want this as a poster for my wall.
Yeah, it looks really sharp. Some people commenting in the chat as well. And I guess it makes sense too, as you say, you're sort of smushing together the timeline in terms of the characters that are appearing. So this, adds a distinctive element where you expect to see all those worlds and they are included. So you sort of, you're giving up one thing, but making sure something else is there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we
I saw
one
BB-8 come up there.
Yeah, we had one adversary card. I was wondering if we could see a few others as well, just to get an idea of what's there.
So you'll notice
they all have
the background tone of BB-9 is red and BB-8 is blue. And this is a theme that goes throughout the cards in the game, and it persists through the force skill cards as well. As I was saying earlier, if you run into a blue card and you are light aligned, that card is a confidant. However, at the bottom of the BB-8 card, you'll see a red bar that says adversary strength 1. So that's what happens if you're dark aligned when you run into BB-8. And conversely, if you're light aligned when you run into BB-9, you look at the bottom of the card there, and you see that the blue bar shows him as an adversary with strength 2. So you would fight him.
Okay. Is it accurate that there's no disoriented side on the Grand Inquisitor, or is that just an accident?
No, the Grand Inquisitor cannot become disoriented.
Neat.
He if you flip him over, he stays himself.
Neat.
That's right.
He is quite
it's
durable.
listed in the special powers there. Okay.
Yep.
So how did the
loose turns? Neat.
How did the construction and development of this game compare with the other Talisman titles that you've done? So what are the special complications, or what have you learned from the earlier ones that you now apply to this one?
I would say, like, having worked on Batman, which was really the first one we did, a lot of the challenge in doing that one was the deep dive into the whole history of Talisman, breaking out third edition, looking back at first and second edition to sort of see what's been done, what can we do, where can we push the boundaries. That required a lot more conversation with Games Workshop about finding the rails that we had to stay on and the places that we could forge ahead and do new things. We also did a pretty significant rules overhaul in terms of how the rules were formatted and some of the ways things were explained from the fourth edition when we did Batman. And then that work kind of paved the way for both Kingdom Hearts and Star Wars, where we kind of figured out what we're allowed to do and where they would let us change a rule or break a rule. And in a lot of cases, what we were finding is Games Workshop was pretty flexible in terms of what we could do. as long as we had 3 regions and, you know, some of the core elements of you need a talisman to reach the center. The talisman could be whatever we choose in the story, but you have to have that object to reach the center of the board. Where we found some limits, I think, is with the Talisman fan base in terms of expectations that they had for how a Talisman game should work. And of course, we had to balance all that as we did these with, okay, Talisman first edition was, I think, 1983 that it came out, and we're in 2020. So games have evolved a little bit since then. And so there's those new fans who maybe never played a Talisman, but they love Star Wars, who are going to be picking this up. And we always have to walk that line of how can we modernize this thing, but still have it be a Talisman game? Because it would be easy to say, well, roll and move's a little dated, so we're just going to take that out entirely and come up with a totally new movement system. And it's like, but is it still Talisman if we do that and we start changing it in that significant of a way? And then with this one, you know, with Batman, we had the challenge that all the characters were villains. And so that core aspect of you have good, neutral, and evil characters became different kinds of evil because all of the characters were bad guys. So you had some who were sort of self-righteous and some who were chaotic and some who were just sort of in the middle. But with Star Wars, it breaks down to you really have good and evil. There's not a lot of neutral characters. And I think at one point, Fletch, maybe you remember more, we talked about, like, are there enough middle of the road characters who kind of walk that line that we could give a neutral status to, or do we break this into that split thing? And that was where Fletch came up with that whole idea for, well, you know, in classic Talisman, if you come across a companion card or a follower card and it's a prince, he'll follow whoever finds him. Like, he doesn't care if they're good or evil or neutral. And that just doesn't work in Star Wars. If Darth Vader's going around and he finds a very good aligned character, that they would just be like, oh, well, I guess Darth got here first, so I guess I'm evil now. And so that dual use card where it's like, for some people this is an enemy and for some people this is a follower card that you can gain, actually for me, like, added a lot of interest to the game, because, you know, it's not just a case of well, okay, I lost the fight, so I'm going to move on from that space and leave that card there. And this happens a lot in Talisman, like the core edition. There's like the level 10 craft villain who, if it comes out early, it's very hard to beat. It's hard to get your craft high enough that you can win that fight, so it tends to sit on the board. In this game, you don't really have that, because it's like, well, I'm incentivized to go beat it if I'm a good aligned character and it's a very strong evil character, because if I leave it there, someone who's playing as a Sith character is just going to go along and land on that space, and they don't have to fight it. They just say, oh, now you're my very powerful friend that I get to take along on my journey. So you have that, like, instead of it being a dead space that sort of players say, I'm going to ignore that until I'm really leveled up. It's like, well, it's to my interest to either deal with that or get very far away from any Sith characters who are coming there to grab that card, because then they're going to come after me. So you have some different choices to make.
Okay. So I don't know, Sean, do you have anything to add to that, or I have follow-up questions?
One of the side effects of that feature, where Pat explained that, you know, sometimes your adversary picks up a powerful character and drags them along. One of the things that sort of evolved from that mechanic that we discovered was really interesting was that when you encounter a character of opposite alignment on the board, you can fight that character. And we thought about what that meant with all of these extra followers tagging along behind them and the confidants. And we realized that you could have some fun adding some insult to injury, where if you beat your opponent in combat, you can then start attacking their confidants and taking their confidants as trophies to try to level yourself up further as the game goes on.
Right. So is there a balancing mechanism if you have an odd number of players? Because then it'll be more likely that someone encounters
it sort of takes care of itself naturally. It balances out where if you've got more dark aligned characters on the board than light aligned characters, then there are fewer confidants for those dark aligned characters to kind of split amongst themselves. So the light aligned
Right.
character, who is at a slight disadvantage because he's outnumbered and there are more people coming to attack him, he's going to have more opportunities to pick up confidants because there's no one else competing for those confidants against him.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Yeah. Sort of self-balancing in that line. It's interesting too, Pat, that you mentioned rewriting the rules and sort of refreshing everything. And I guess that also ties into the notion of going back to a game that, of course, originated decades ago, but even 4th edition now is many years old, and sort of rules technology has changed since that time, or at least the idea of how people learn games.
Yeah, it was an interesting project to look at because you know, in looking at the 4th revised edition rules, I want to say they're 22 or 24 pages long. They're pretty hefty rule book for a game at its core. It's a roll and move, and then follow the instructions for the space you land on is really how the game is played, and everything's kind of explained on the cards. But there was a lot of detailed explanation in that rule book of, well, in this specific case, if this thing happens, here's how you deal with that. And what we looked at a lot was, you know, are there ways to revise cards or clean things up to limit the number of sort of corner case rules we need? And when I was first doing that rules revision and taking that on and then working with the whole team to get it to a point where it made sense, I was like, well, let me pull out the 3rd edition. I had a copy of Talisman 3rd edition that I own, and I pulled out the rule book, and that one is like 4 pages, including the cover. You know, which is a pretty big leap between those versions. But my favorite thing is in the back of the 3rd edition rule book, there is the golden rule, which is if you have a debate on what a rule should be, and it's not clear to your group, you have to reduce that rule to a yes or no question and then flip a coin. And that's actually printed in the rule book of like, well, if all else fails and we miss something, just sort of boil it down and say, well, yes or no, flip the coin, and that's how you play from then on, and that's the new rule. And I was like, boy, I wish I could get away with that more often in rule books. Like, oh, well, if you can't figure it out, just roll a D20, and you know, if it's above this, give it to player 4 as the deciding factor, or whatever it would be. You know, just totally rules randomness that way.
That is a interesting way around rules lawyers in a sense. So you don't have to argue too much about the text and the specific detail, and it's only this, not this only. I know, just like, yes, the wording of everything you can start arguing over. Final question, because we're just about out of time. When will this be available? I believe November is the date, and is that correct?
My understanding is January.
Okay.
And it's EMEA, as you mentioned. $69.99, I believe, Pat.
That sounds all correct to me. Yeah. And it's just like our, as I said, like the other Star Wars product, it's EMEA. We've certainly seen plenty of clever folks here in North America find ways to get those games like Dark Side Rising brought into the US. So we know there's ways, but we are limited to EMEA for where we can sell through retailers.
Okay. And it will be available in the UK still right now, since it's still part of E at the moment? I had someone in chat asking about that. Okay. Someone asked as well, do you use any rules from Relic in there? I don't know. That's Scott jumping in to ask.
I'm trying to remember, because back when we did Batman, we definitely looked at Relic and played it and kind of looked through how that rule book was structured. And it's been so long since that point that I can't remember what made it into the Batman rulebook that then may have carried over into Star Wars from there as we iterated.
It's all sort of melded together at a time, and now it just becomes your own in a sense. So that makes sense. All right. Well, thank you very much for the look at Talisman Star Wars. There is one copy in California in Lincoln's hands, so you can hunt him down.
Back on teaser.
That's right. And play there. Otherwise, yes, get it in the EMA regions. Thank you very much, Pat and Sean, for joining us, looking at Talisman Star Wars.